It's about to go down with Marc and Cathey, a live coaching show about dropping ideas. Marc and Cathey coach and have conversations with brilliant idea creators who are reimagining the world through the expression of their words, thoughts, and action.
Hey everybody, I'm Cathey Armias. Welcome to It's About to Go Down.
And I am Mark Williams, and I can't wait to have this conversation today with my fellow tech alum. But way beyond that, this is my new nickname for you, my friend, the Fountain of Interesting.
Yes.
I mean, he calls himself a geek. He says he's still a geek, but you are really the Fountain of Interesting. And there's so many different stories that we could tell about you. And, you know, how you started in film for what was it, like 2 days? And then it became this 20-year career. Like, you're absolutely amazing. And the reason why we invited Colin Ho-Shing on today's show is because Colin and I were having a conversation at our friend Scott's birthday party. And he blew my mind with the stuff that he's talking about. I mean, right now he's got this patent pending on this project that is something that we have not seen. But he has seen other people do it, but he wants to do it on a bigger, larger scale. I mean, this is the giganticness. I just made that word up. The giganticness of the interesting ideas that are coming out in his brain. And we are going to finish off our Cheesecake conversation today. So Colin Ho-Shing, tell us, what's your idea about this big, gigantic thing that you want to bring to the world? And what do you want to do with this idea, my friend?
Well, first off, thank you for using the term the fountain of interesting. I mean, you know, glass is half full, half empty, because the other half of my friends might call me a pool of BS. So I like the fountain. It sounds a little more angelic, a little more, you know, Italian sculpture.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I'll go back. It was about, a little over 5 years ago. I was in California. I'm just as life takes me. I'm driving up the PCH. I'm camping in the back of a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and this was completely spontaneous. I had to get from San Francisco back to Los Angeles overnight for a flight. I'm driving, beautiful sky, and, you know, because it's hot out there desert-wise, they do their construction work at nighttime. So now I went from doing a little over 100 on the dash, standstill, no light pollution. I'm looking out the sunroof, I see stars, it's beautiful. And in my mind, I was thinking, oh man, this would be great if a UFO could like beam me up and just fly me straight down the coast and drop me off. That's not likely to happen, at least not without an anal probe. Then I was thinking, wow, it would be awesome if I had the technology. I could shrink myself down, fit into one of these little drones that you see everybody flying around, fly down the coast and enlarge yourself. You know, when you're sitting in the car, you have these wild ideas when you're by yourself. And I was like, well, that's definitely not happening. So, but then it hit me. I was like, well, what's to stop me from just making a larger quadcopter? And over the next 6 hours of driving, on a brown paper bag that my snacks were in, dumped it out, and I actually did the simulation, the math, and a lot of the stuff in my head, and I was sketching it out on the brown paper bag every time I had to stop. So we fast forward. 6 hours later, I get to my aunt's house, aunt and cousins out in Rancho Cucamonga, which I always thought Bugs Bunny made that up, but whatever.
It's a real place.
It is, apparently. I get there, you know, once I hadn't seen them in 44 years, but once we get through some welcome cake, I'm looking over. This is the first time I'm not in the vehicle moving, and I'm looking over my notes. My cousin Chris says, "What do you got there?" I said, "Well, you know, I was still in geek mode. So I explained it to him completely in geek mode. And he just looks at me. He's like, oh, that'll work. I was like, yeah, thanks, cuz. Thanks for the belief. He said, no, that'll work. I was like, I'm glad you really believe in me. And he's like, no, I'm telling you that will work. So now with his tone of voice, I was like, okay, why are you so adamant about that? He looks me straight in the eye. He's like, you don't know what I did you? I was like, I haven't seen you in two score. I have no idea what you did. He's like, I worked for Boeing for 12 years. He's like, I understood everything you said, and I'm telling you that will work. So I said, oh, wow. So it was like instant mental gratification. Anyway, I get home and I wasn't really thinking too much about it, but I didn't have any purpose for it at the time. I was just thought it'd be a cool project for me to work on and make a solution. Now, while I was in Cali, and part of like Big Sur, and that was closed due to forest fires. And I remember I'd driven through a scorched part of land. And let me tell you, that's an eerie feeling when you drive through a place where the ground is black and all you see are maybe 2-3 foot high charred stumps of what were trees, and you can still smell it, you know? And that stuck in my mind. Anyway, I get home and on the news, they were talking about the forest fires out there. And I remember they'd said that there was 4,000 vehicles, 2,000 person, no, sorry, 4,000 personnel, 2,000 vehicles, and 12 aerial between planes and helicopters to fight this fire. And my mind was like, wow, that's not good. And just like instantly, I was thinking, I was like, wow, you know, it'd be kind of cool if I could scale this bigger and using swarm technology, which in short, you see all of the drone light shows now, it's swarm technology. And in short, what that is, you have one computer controlling hundreds, even 1,000 or 2,000 drones for doing the light shows. So that immediately popped in my head. I was like, well, if I could scale it bigger and they could carry, a sufficient amount of water, that could probably put a dent in it. So did a lot of research in that, but at the same time, I started to suss out the idea. Like now I'm still treating it as a hobby and I'm still playing with it. But over time, it clicked that I really had something there. And now I started to ask the questions, why isn't anyone else doing this? What's happening? And I'm looking at the limitations. And I realized that when drones, I mean, again, people call them drones and they associate quadcopters just because the way the media introduce it to the masses. By right, drone just means any unmanned vehicle. But these quadcopters, when they were introduced to people, it came out as a toy. And everyone recalls at first, somebody decided to put a GoPro on it and they got these first aerial shots. And we were all amazed, like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So, now everyone was into these low altitude aerial shots and, the cinematic of it. It was really wonderful. But you start to have a few people thinking outside the box. You had some farmers thinking, well, hey, couldn't we do some crop dusting? You had some people wanted to do surveying. Some people wanted to check on equipment, for example, pipelines and wind turbines. So, you started to have other people with some commercial needs. And up until then, you were paying for a helicopter or a plane, both of which are expensive. And, like I said, in that space, it's a very small niche. So I immediately thought, well, this could make a difference. And then, I started really looking into how many areas this could affect. And I was actually surprised. And this goes before Amazon and like Walmart were thinking about last mile things of, just dropping packages to your house and, making it quicker. I realized you had third world countries where the hospitals are so far out. When they need medication, it's a long, tedious process. So, getting a drone to drop off medication that was needed immediately, you could do that. But then some of them couldn't carry the distance. There was a lot of obstacles because up until now, they were trying to scale up a toy version of the drones. Fortunately, when it popped into my head, I immediately was thinking heavy lift, long range. So I stripped it down from the way they're currently designed, and I just started from there and moved forward, thinking all the time. Every decision I made designing it was, how can I make it heavy lift? How can I make it long range? How can I make it scalable in size? And as well as using multiple fuel sources. So, over time, I switched it from being a hobby to something that needed to be done. And here we are now. A few years later, I have a patent filed February of last year. I'm on the third version of a prototype. It's not flying yet because when I did design the first one completely from my mind, and once I finished the hardware of it, it was fully built. I finished the hardware. I now had to think about the electronics and the software. And I was going to use off-the-shelf stuff. I was going to use DJI, but there was too many little obstacles. I used some open source stuff. But once my mind got a break from thinking about the design of the hardware, when you, I mean, we've all had this in school. You write a paper, probably the night before it's due, and you get it back. Then, you submit it. I like the look on Mark. He's like, I've never done that. I know not what you speak.
And then I'm like, yes, yeah, 100%.
He's like, every time. Yeah, you get the paper back from the teacher, and whatever grade you got, you just toss it on your bed. Months later, you're finally cleaning up your room, and you look at the paper again, and suddenly you see all of the things you should have done, all the edits you should have made. Yeah. Now, because my brain got a break from the hardware side of it, and I was thinking completely electronics and software, when I look back at the project, probably it was like weeks later, I started seeing changes. I started seeing like, oh, I should do this. I should change that. And I'm making note of it. And at first I was like, oh, little things here and there, I'll do this. So over time, there were so many changes that it was easier for me to do version 2 rather than implement them in version 1. Mm-hmm. So I did just that. However, I'll tell you, when you're designing something and it's sweat equity, and I'm one person. I do have an engineer that I used in India. It's my third engineer. These guys are fantastic, let me tell you. Funny thing is that they never knew exactly what it was that they were working on, because but pre-patent pending, I didn't tell them anything. I just, whichever obstacle I had, I sent them just that little bit to solve. And sometimes I could do it myself, because fortunately in tech, I did civil engineering. And I'll tell you, when you do any kind of engineering, there are multiple things that overlap. It's kind of like med. If you're an eye doctor or foot doctor, you're still a general MD first, and then you branch out into specialties. Mm-hmm. When it comes to engineering, material science, physics, and mathematics are consistent throughout everything. It's just you're looking at different aspects of the material science. If you're an architect, you're looking literally at physical things like soil and sand and wood. If you're aeronautics, then you're looking at air. If you're dealing with the sea, you're dealing with ocean. So it's just different aspects of material science, but still, it's a consistency without. So I taught myself mechanical engineering based on
Of course you did. Of course you did.
I mean, I taught what I needed to know. I filled in the gaps of what I needed to know to get what to get where I needed it to be to get it done. So, it's I lost my train of thought.
well, you know what? Let's hold off there for a second, because I've heard so much of this, And Cathey, I'm curious on your thoughts, but I got to tell you, I wrote down these three things.
Mhm.
When a hobby becomes, why isn't someone else doing this?
Mm-hmm.
When a hobby becomes something that can make a difference, when a hobby becomes something that needs to be done.
Mm.
I'm just geeking out right now over beyond the actual project
Mhm.
and the inspiration behind it. So Cathey, I'm just curious because you are the queen of the TED Talk. I am just curious where your brain is landing right now. No pun intended.
Yeah, yeah. And is it a heavy lift or not? I mean, it might be a light lift. I don't know. Oh, Colin, first of all, I can completely understand why you are Mr. Fountain of Interesting for sure. And this whole story, I have like 2 pages of notes, Mark. I'm like, what is that? What? So some of the things you said, I had already written down. In addition, I also fascinated with how you kind of like literally were driving down and trying to figure this out. And then you're having a conversation with it was your cousin, right? Your cousin
Yes.
that worked for Boeing. And he's like, yeah, this can work. And you're like, oh, awesome. Cause I just kind of dreamt it up. Like I was kind of having a weird kind of dream state and was thinking that I could shrink myself and all this, I was like, I don't know if LSD was involved, but it was kind of like he was just
Sleep, lack of sleep, probably.
yes, right. So you're in this kind of state of like, wow, what could, which is awesome. It like so here's some of my thoughts too, Mark. And I thank you for stopping the story for a second because I think getting to hear our perspective might kind of help you continue. But Colin, you are so fascinating because
Yeah.
you took something and you were able to, first of all, ignore the norms of the world of like the
Mm.
first question for everybody would have probably been, oh, somebody else is probably already doing this. There's companies out there that have a lot more money than I do, that have a lot more resources. And so I first of all applaud you for, being brave enough to just say, you know what, I'm gonna swim in these waters and I don't care. So I love that you did that. And I think that's how brilliant things come to be sometimes,
And also
Um,
change, just, so like, as you said, so many people, they will go down the same path. And I've always thought about it, if I'm going to do something, I like in the example, if I'm going to open up a pizza shop in New York City, there are hundreds of pizza shops. Before I do it, I'd ask myself, what am I going to do different than
mm,
everybody else that's going to drive the business from them to me?
yep.
And like anything that I'm designing, thinking of it, I always go into it with that. It's like, even if it's already done, what am I going to do different? And if I can't do something different, then what's already done in my mind is probably as good as it's going to get.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. See, I love that. That's what I kind of wanted to put like a notation on was the brilliant creativity that you had put into this is amazing. But yeah, I would love to hear the rest of the story. I think that I think that I had wrote down some of the same things that Mark did, and I want to hear kind of I kind of want to hear where you're at, and then let's shake it out and see what's next.
Yeah. Where did I leave off? I forgot where when I
Oh, well,
stopped.
here's what I had that you left off. You became a mechanical engineer basically by filling in the gaps and figuring out what you needed to figure out and working
Right.
with this team in India or these engineers in India that didn't know what you were doing. That's
Right. Yeah.
fascinating as
Yeah. Yeah.
well.
Like there's one engineer in India. Like I started with an engineer in Canada, in Toronto, and like I've been fortunate. Like I use Upwork, and to you post what you're looking
Mm.
for, and you weed through, and just like anything else, little online interview, you find what you need. So I was fortunate enough to find some extremely talented guys, that they were just out of school, didn't really have the work experience, but they had the right
Mhm.
mindset, and they already had their stuff together. And anything that I couldn't do, or I knew that they could do better, because I was still working a 12-hour a day job while I'm trying to prototype this. It's not as though I have all the free time in the world. Mark knows I work in the film industry, so a 60-hour is a standard week. So 60 plus. So I didn't really have all the time in the world. And I looked at it at first. I tell you, I was very protective of the idea. I didn't really want to put it out there until I did it myself. It was just the challenge of it. It's like kind of like a Rubik's Cube. It's like you want to solve it. So you're sitting there. And at some point in time, it's like, okay, I need some help. And it was better for me to make the money at work and pay somebody to solve the hard parts of it. Even if I could do it, I'd rather just pay them to solve it while I focus on something else, And I'll tell you, that's as somebody just coming into the design, designing it on my own, it's a hard nut to crack because you want to do it yourself. And at some point you have to realize, all right, I just need to delegate. I need help and I need to delegate. And yeah, I found some talented guys. My current engineer that's been with me for 3 years. The previous two, as I said, when they got out of school, at some point they got a job and they just didn't have the time. They were fascinated with the bits that I gave them and the tasks that I gave them. They were really fascinated with that, not even knowing what the full project is. So, when I got the guy in India, a really cool dude, he actually did have some previous work background. And fortunately, what I needed, he actually did that in so for one or two companies, not in the way that I needed it. So it was often a different tangent, but he had some real world experience in designing something similar to what I needed. So it was a challenge for him because now, like, oh, well, I do something like that. I was like, great, you have some real world experience, which helped a lot. But yeah, so it's again, it's not easy when you're funding all of this yourself. But yeah, it's getting there. As I said, version 3 is just about done. Hopefully, I guess that's version 2. I when you design something, I expect it to fail. I want to fail fast and fix it quick. The faster I fail, the faster I can get past it and go on to the next version. So there was one of the tricky things is the first versions, I completely designed everything exactly the way I wanted it, and I have a very awesome 3D printer, but there were some parts that needed to be metal, and I was having them manufactured, and it was like a 33-day turnaround time, and they were very expensive. And I'll tell you, anyone who's trying to prototype things, if you're doing it in the States, it's about 4 to 5 times the cost of doing it overseas. But then there's the turnaround time. So when I was doing version 2, I thought, all right, let me change my process and design it with as much off-the-shelf parts that I could. But of course that becomes another tricky thing because now you have to see all of the parts that are out there, get all of the specs, and then you try to design within those parts and then testing things. It's a lot more research and a lot more legwork. But one part of like the whole drive chain, there were 2 gears in there that I just did not feel like waiting another 20 plus days for them to come. So I 3D printed them. It's like, you know what? I'll just go with it like this. So when I was testing it in my aunt's backyard, I knew something was going to break. And I said, if anything breaks, it'll be the only 2 parts that are not metal. Those gears didn't break. They exploded.
Wow.
So yeah, I completely just disintegrated. It's like, all right.
Wow.
So,
okay.
yeah.
Check.
So, right. Exactly. It's good that the part that I expected to break is exactly what broke, right where I thought it would. So then, version 3 is where we are now. I'm just waiting on 1 or 2 parts. And at this point, I don't see anything that would physically not work. It's not a thing of cocky. I just think I think I've broken enough things. I've been playing. It's like playing whack-a-mole. You know, problem pops up, you beat it down, and you just keep doing this until they stop coming up. And at this point, I don't see any other hardware issues. I'm still playing with the software and electronics, but I think I got that wise out. Fortunately, I'm using off the shelf things currently, even though, as I was telling Mark, through a good friend of mine, Peggy, she works with the Nova Sky team out at Burning Man, and they do a lot of drone shows globally. It's a company that Kimball Musk is a part of, and the drone show that was in Central Park, she invited me over because she's like, oh, you could come behind the scenes, and talking about behind the scenes, we could come behind the scenes and meet some of the guys. So uh the one guy, Jordan, I think it's Jordan, and he's Mark, you want to talk about interesting people, this guy. But his son, who turned 20 the day after that drone show in the park, he was the one that actually coded that whole drone show. He coded and programmed that whole thing. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you in a bit, Mark, like this guy, real quick. His mother was the one to build the first 100 Apple computers. They were built on his kitchen table. His mother physically wrote the manuals for the Apple computer for the Atari 2600, because Nolan Bushell was also a family friend. Because I mentioned something about Steve Wozniak, and he's like, oh, he's like this. I was like, how do you know? He's like, oh yeah, we're family friends. And then he told me this whole backstory. Not only did he tell me, he showed me photos of everything. His grandfather worked on ENIAC, the first computer. Yeah, his father worked on like the first chip that did something with in pacemakers. Like the whole family is just like interesting. It's like I'm nothing compared to them. But either way, I told him about the project, and I said, once I move a little further along, would you be interested in helping do some custom software for it and some custom electronics? And he was interested. And so I'll reconnect with him once I'm there. Once I get it in the air and things move to the next phase, which I'm hoping I will have it airborne this summer, and then I can move to the funding phase, which is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
We know about that. Colin,
Yeah.
this is so interesting. You know what's so interesting about this conversation right now when we're having it is many times we talk to people about ideas that aren't products or inventions or something that we haven't seen in the world. And you're talking about something that none of us have seen. Well, most of us haven't seen, And I would love to ask you, what is your best case scenario of how you see this playing out? Like how do you see this idea coming to fruition? What part do you want to play in it? What do you like? Tell us more about that.
well, good thing you asked.
You're like, I'm ready. I'm ready. Let's go.
So as I mentioned before, as far as the VTOL space, vertical takeoff and landing, the only thing you really have is the helicopter. And it has a limited usage in a sense, and it's a high cost with it. I would like to enter that space and add to it, because again, as my design is scalable in size and adaptable with needs, it also can use most fuel sources. On the smaller end, you look at somebody like Amazon or Walmart that they want to deliver packages. You can scale them down for that. When you go a little bigger, I said, the air taxis, which is a huge thing, because, when you think about the ability, I don't like to say, I don't really want to say like flying cars, because when you say that, then suddenly, a lot of people think you're a kook. It's like, oh, you're designing flying cars. Okay, nice talking to you. But, if you think about low cost vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, a flying car, people, you go back to the way villages and towns initially organically were formed. They were always formed by large bodies of water or by a river. And you think about when people come to cities, they want to be close to the center of the city, usually because that's where a majority of them work. So they want to be within a certain distance from that. You look at Manhattan, we're here in New York. I know you're out in Portland, I believe. When in New York, when people first come to New York and they're working, a lot of them want to be close to Manhattan, either for access to work or just quick access to all of the things that people like about New York. Now, of course, the cost of that does prohibit some people, and they have to move a little further out. And the further out you get, yes, things may be cheaper, but now you have that commute time get in and the inconvenience of it, depending on how far and where you are. Now, if you thought about, again, the flying car, if you can bring the cost of this down and it becomes a common thing, like the Jetsons, suddenly you don't have to live so close to the city. So one of the companies that is, it's like in the air taxi space, when I filed the patent, there were about 190 companies trying to make air taxis. I looked it up today. There's now 250 companies trying to do this. The number 1 and 2 companies currently, there's one company called Joby. They have about 900 employees, the $2 billion valuation. And in 2021, they signed a $1 billion contract with United Airlines to produce air taxis. The second company is Archer. And I think they have about $850 million valuation. Both of them have working prototypes that they got FAA approval last year. In fact, one of my friends was at the test somewhere in Manhattan, I believe. So, but their versions, and I've seen them, they're both 5-passenger versions. So, pilot plus 4. So, and they plan to come into real world fruition, I think, in 25 or 26, reading, the specs and what have you. And if that comes in at a low cost, if it comes in at a common low cost, the options for being in and around in the city, it's expanded. So the Joby, I saw on their website, they say that their air taxi can go from Midtown Manhattan to JFK in 7 minutes. Now, if you could leap that distance, think about the effect that you could have if you lived in upstate New York, or you lived, further out in Jersey, or, I have coworkers that drive from the Poconos every day into Manhattan. But think, you don't have to be so focused about living immediately in the city center or right on the outskirts of it. You could actually be a little further out. If your commute time, I think for most people, if they could get to Manhattan in 30 to 45 minutes, they might not really care where they live. And, air taxis, flying cars could make it. Like, yeah, see, when you think about it, with the cost and just being on top of everybody, if you knew that you could hop in a VTOL and 30 minutes you're in downtown Manhattan, and also take off the same way and disappear, 30 minutes later you're home, you don't have to be, you don't have to be in the expensive areas, and then also when you look at in between the major cities, there's a lot of land that's underused. I mean, we know once we go out, we leave the city and head out into Jersey, as you're driving, like there's so much on the road, there's so much green to the left, to the right, nothing's happening with it. It can be used. I mean, that's just an example. I'm not saying they would, but all these options pop up. You have Pennsylvania, other areas that you're like, well, there's a lot of space. You don't have to be on top of everyone in the city if you can quickly get to and from the city. So, that is, I would think that's like one ultimate usage of it, as well as, again, search and rescue. Now, when you think about rapid response, so, here in New York, we've got the Long Island Expressway. Let's think about on a Friday when everybody is trying to head out to the beach, 5 p.m. on a Friday, the LIE gets crowded. If there's an accident there, emergency vehicles have to get into the accident, and then they have to make it out to the hospital. And granted, they're going through, I mean, yes, they have their sirens, what have you, but they still have to go the path of the road. If you could take that airborne, and now, yes, you do have helicopters, but for a helicopter to land, you need a lot of open space. With the multi-rotors, it does not necessarily have to have the same clearance as the blades of a helicopter. The rotors on a helicopter are very big, and you can, just for safety reasons, it requires a lot of space. It needs some dedicated things. So they do bring that out in some situations, but it's usually extreme situations. You don't see that happening for every car crash and every time someone has to make it to the hospital. So um, with a VTOL, ambulette, you could land in the parking lot. You could land on the highway. You could get to and from rapidly, which is one way to save lives. Then you have just just as far as like law enforcement on highways. We watch so many car chases, and yeah, the helicopters is monitoring where they're going, but they can't intervene. They can't like come down and actually land and do anything there. So I mean, there's that. There's a lot of spaces. Then
This is genius.
on the heavier side of things, I was even thinking down the line again, because my design is scalable. And I was thinking this specifically along the lines of Amazon. They use so many tractor trailers and big rigs to transport all of the cargo. And like, like I said, my design's scalable, so we could take that airborne. And yes, I've had several friends play devil's advocate, and they're like, well, where's it going to fly? What about regulations and such? And I was like, well, two things with that. One, Porsche, when they design a car, they're not thinking about speed limits in towns. That's for lawmakers, FAA, and other people. Right. However, I did think about that. Said, all right, just because, yes, it's true. When flying taxis and all these things do come out, and they eventually will. Again, there's 250 companies working on this, so someone's going to crack that nut. I don't think I will be the only one. I'm just trying to be the first one. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of people wary about all these heavy loads flying over their heads. So I said, well, look, they can fly low over the water routes. Ships have been doing water routes forever. There are already ports, and you have an infrastructure to move them from boats onto trucks and inland where they need to go. So if you could take the cargo, and I'm not saying the entire load of a tractor trailer, it could be smaller, but still, if you could take that and either through swarm technology or, some supervised drones, and you take that over a water route, you could eliminate the amount of congestion on the roads. And with a partner as large as, say, Amazon, and if you remember, I did say that my design, you could use any fuel source. So I thought that hydrogen, which is, a lot of people say, well, you have electric. And I think that each fuel source has its own pros and cons. You look at now when everyone has something positive or negative to say about electric cars. Some people, those who have them, and I know several people that have them. In fact, my cousin that lives here, she works for Tesla. She has one. Electric cars are fantastic, but they do have some drawbacks. One being, some people say, well, I just go to the gas station with my regular car and I put gas in and I go. And like, I don't want to have to wait. And, there's that argument, and I'm not going to get into that. But when you look at hydrogen, the output of hydrogen is water and 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 oxygen. Like when it burns clean. There's no dust, there's no cold, it's completely clean. You have some other countries that are focusing on hydrogen cars. I believe Honda's doing one, but again, other countries. Here, they don't have the infrastructure for that. However, if, you know, if this got to the scale that I want it to be, and say, again, a partner like Amazon, if they devoted part of their fleet to doing this, they do have the resources to have hydrogen stations for their fleet around. So, when you think of it now, that's one, you're not using trucks with diesel or gas or any fuel source like that. Hydrogen is clean burning and it's lightweight. One of the drawbacks with electric if you look at all of the it's like eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, all the air taxis that I'm looking at, and all of the companies, they are using electric. And the problem it's great is that it's clean, it's quieter. But one of the problems with that is you have a limited range because, like it or not, lithium ion batteries do have some weight to them. And, if you want to and this is one of the things that keeps all of the current multi-rotors that I see out there to a certain size. If you want to carry more weight or you want to go a greater distance, you need more a denser fuel source. So if you want to, like I said, if you want to carry heavier weight, you have to use bigger props, bigger motors, and with that you need more batteries. Those batteries weigh more. So the head of the snake eats the tail. So, and it still gives you around a similar flight time. Now, hydrogen, obviously, it's much lighter, cleaner burning, easy to refuel. So, my design, like, I can see a lot going this way.
Colin, again, my mind is blown, and I thought I was a geek, but you definitely are the king of this in terms of all the technology. I'm curious about something completely different. Let's put a timeline on this based on what Cathey just asked. And let's say 20 years from now, this is all happening. Things are flying around, heavy, large scale stuff, Amazon, law enforcement, all the different things you're talking about. And then you get an invitation to our alma mater, Brooklyn Tech, to speak to a bunch of graduates who are about to take their next step in the world. They can go on, hush my mouth. They can go on Wikipedia or, read your biography, and they could find out the history of from when Colin was sitting in the car up until the point where there's all these things. So you don't tell them the history of the invention. You plant a thought in their head that is now going to inspire whatever that next thing is. What's your message to that audience?
Well, it's funny you asked that. One of the things that actually frustrates me with the current education system, I know this goes off on a little bit of a topic. So my mom used to be a teacher in Jamaica and here in the States. And, in the years, like in my latter years, like, in my free time, I love to travel. If I'm not working, I'm on a plane, I'm somewhere. I've been to a couple countries for fun, just to, put my feet on foreign soil. I look at the way other cultures will educate, and they teach them how to think, and then they teach them how to solve problems and issues. And I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the current education system here is they're more focused on teaching people how to pass tests as opposed to how to think strategically, how to
Mm.
problem solve, how to think creatively. And I think once you have mastered how to creatively think and creatively solve something, there are always problems to be solved. And, let's be real, this is a world that is focused around financial gain. If you want to make money, solve a problem.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can go into sports, you could go into entertainment, you can go into law, you can go into finance. But if you really, really, really want to make money and at the same time um, advance technology and civilization, solve a problem. There are, you look around, like everybody's complaining about something. There are problems all over, and they can be solved. And it's funny, like this drone is not my first thing that I was working on. I was actually working on a robotics project, and um, I'm actually more along with that. But my buddy Brian is kind of like my patent mentor as well. There's this guy, talk about another interesting guy. He's got 7 patents, and one of his now is in cybersecurity, and he's going to make a big deal.
Mm.
It's getting there right now. I'll tell you that off the mic. I don't know how much he wants me to discuss his thing, but when he at first, and when you talk to people, if you like I said, I work in film, so everybody is writing a screenplay. Everybody has a story. And when somebody says, "Oh, you're in film," "Oh, I'm writing a screenplay," your first response is like, "Okay, yeah, I know, of course, yeah." So when I met him, because he's the boyfriend of one of my really, really good friends. Um, when they actually moved upstate and I was like hanging out at the house now as opposed to just parties downtown, and I got to know him and we're talking, it turns out that we're both geeks. His father was an engineering professor. We're both geeks now. And of course I said, "Oh, you know what? I'm working on a project. I've got this." And he was like, "Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting." Again, just like when someone tells you, "I wrote a screenplay," you're just like, "Okay, yeah." We fast forward. He's giving me little bits of advice of like, this was before I filed the patent, and I didn't even get to read the book yet on it. I did a little research. He recommended a book for me to read, and once we trusted each other more, and signed an NDA, I gave him the secret sauce to how my design works. He immediately was like, "I did not realize that." Oh my God! He's like, "Stop everything you're doing and just focus on that." I was like,
Mm.
"Well, I'm doing my robotic thing." I was like, "That's more along." He's like, "No, stop that and do this first."
Wow.
And I was like, "You sure?" He said, "Trust me, do this first." And he even suggested that I just stop my job and go out and find investors and grants and just focus on this full time. And as nice as that sounds, yeah, that's not the route that I was going. And I'll tell honestly, I'll even tell you why too. Like growing up in the city, if like Mark probably has this same thing. We grew up here where if you say you have something, people doubt and question you until you can prove it. I did not grow up in the realm of I have an idea, write me a check. Can you prove it? Nah, I have an idea, you know. And we see now how many of those people it was vaporware, and some of them are even in jail for falsifying,
Mm.
an idea that didn't really exist. So
Mm.
for me, it was easier to finish the working prototype and then to seek funding. And I mean, there's also other things with that works out a little bit better. To make a fat story skinny, if you um, don't have a patent granted and you don't have a working prototype yet, and you go to look for investors, it's a big risk for them. If you have the patent granted, it's less of a risk. If you have a working prototype, it's even less. Now, the greater the risk for them, they're going to want a bigger chunk,
Mm.
of it. And I did not sweat this much and work this hard to hand over as much as they would want. So for me, it was better off that I have the working prototype. And yes, I know I've had several friends disagree with that. They say, look, get it out there now, do it. And I've always looked at the difference between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. You know, when Jobs was at Apple at the helm, when he went on air, you know, with his just one more thing, he already had it built. And I remember one time someone said, he just introduced, he was on stage introducing, and someone said, when's this available? And he's like, Thursday. You know, he already did it. Now, another fun story I'll tell you, Mark, later on. I was just sheer luck. I ended up crashing at the house of a Microsoft programmer, and he was the 200th programmer. He's been there from the very beginning when they were only in one building. He was the 200th programmer. And, you know, Microsoft, they're great, but I mean, we all know that they would promise something. And he told me this, that a lot of times the programmers found out about a project when Gates would announce it. They hadn't even written a line of code, you know? So when you look at it from both ways, he would announce it and then make it. And, you know, as we know, we would be the ones doing a lot of the guinea pig testing of it, as opposed to Jobs that would have it as best as he could at the time of launch. Is one better than the other? No, they're two solid companies now. So, you know, I do have my friends that are like, look, just get financing and just get the financing and then finish the prototype and, you know, move ahead. And then some people that agree with me, you know, I mean, it's just two different ways of thinking. There's no right or wrong. I'm just going this path at the moment. Also, again, it's just kind of my nature I like to have the proof in my hand when I say, hey, look at this. Can you help me out? Can you finance? As well as I know that the second I have any kind of either venture capitalist or angel investors, then there's going to be that pressure on my neck to, you know, there's going to be the calls of like, how far are we? When is it going to fly? Where are things? Where do we stand? And at the moment, I'm not in the mood for that pressure. You know, I put enough pressure on myself to get it done.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to see it all in fruition. Cathey, I see your wheels turning.
Yeah, Colin, this has been so fascinating. I have 4 pages of notes. I think it's the most notes I've ever taken. I just feel like I'm sitting here going to school. I'm like,
Full of BS, I told you.
No, the school of really thinking about how an idea comes together. Mark, I was thinking about it as he was just talking. I was like, this is a unique show where Colin is like taking us into a space right now where he's right kind of in the middle. And it's not even come to fruition yet, but all the things that you've had to think about are very fascinating. And I wanted to say 2 things. First of all, you made me think about it when you were talking about the electric vehicle and stuff. And I was thinking some inventions are necessary so that it can pave the way for other inventions. So Mark, you said something like maybe 20 years from now. And I'm like, maybe 20 years from now, it's a totally different thing. But the thing that Colin's doing right now made it possible for something else. Because maybe the electric vehicle, for instance, goes completely away if hydrogen, like, I don't know the technical aspects of all this, but it made me think that that's why ideas are important. And so when you said that other cultures are really good at making people think, like, I love that I circled it. I was like, that is so true. And we don't do enough of that. I love that.
You know, when not to cut you, but you look at one of the things growing up, you know, like Mark and I, you know, we went Brooklyn Tech, so we went to the geek school. And I mean, you know how it is. You look in the back of the comic books, you always saw the geek's head being pushed in the sand by the bully. So, you know, people would, if they were smart and they knew they're smart, sometimes they would gravitate away from anything that was seemed too geekish or too intellectual for fear of being ostracized. You know, times have changed a bit. Now people are gravitating to the geek, and I think it's because they see that geeks make a lot.
Yeah.
But
And come up with really good ideas.
yeah, but
And
but
that's
still,
the key.
Yeah.
but but still, like here, it's not the intelligence is not um nurtured the same way. And I'll tell you, when I was on vacation in the Philippines, and I remember we were cutting through the mall, and there was like a crowd of people in one area, and I was like, oh, let me stroll over there, see what's going on. My friends and I, we walked over there, and like in this huge area, it was a massive chess competition. They must have had about 40 or 50 tables of people competing playing chess, and you saw the crowd was around them. And the first thing I said to my buddy is like, wow, that could never happen here. Like people there, you know, I'm not saying anything one's bad or good, but here people will gravitate around sports and other like gimmickry. When it comes to intellectual things, it's not so, you're not going to find that in a mall and that many people like into it. But like and you see it, like also there's the great brain drain. A lot, if you look at a lot of the researchers and scientists and engineers, they come from other countries. They will do their schooling in other countries, and then they will come here for the big bucks. Then it's not so many homegrown. Yeah, because like it's just different ways of thinking and schooling. And that's one thing that's always, made me like, oh, I wish I could do something different. And Mark, I'll tell you later, I do have an idea for way down the line when, hopefully finances catch up with my ideas. I'll tell both of you later, but I have something to solve that as well.
That's it. That's it. It's like you said, and Cathey, I don't know if you said the second thing yet, but I just wrote down, there are always problems to solve.
I wrote
Creatively
that down too.
think and creatively solve. And I love what you just said here too. Well, you said it a different way. The way I summarized it was intelligence needs to be nurtured. And I thought that was a very powerful statement that people need to hear. Kath, you had a second thing you wanted to say first?
Yeah, I really think this is so important for you, Colin, and for everybody that's watching. One thing that you said that there were like the two different ways. There's like the Gates way, and if you're looking at Apple and Microsoft and you look at the different ways, I started thinking while you were talking that there's many inventions that were created, and the company that originally first came out with it didn't last. I mean, sometimes it works out, and I think sometimes it doesn't. Because I think what happened, if you look historically, they'll come, first to market, and then all these other companies are like, that's a great idea. Like they kind of half-assed it. So like, let's put somebody on it and do it right. And then other companies blew them out of the water, and then they're not even around anymore. There's so many examples of that.
Blockbuster Netflix.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was even thinking about too, the what now is generically like the DVR, the technology. What was the name of the company that first came out? I don't even remember the name of the company. That's how there was a name of a company that first came out with it, and it was kind of like
TiVo.
Yeah, TiVo. Thank you, TiVo. Exactly. Yeah, like there's a lot of inventions like that, and so one of the things I thought, Colin, that you did that I think is really brilliant too, is your patience and your timing on your own idea. It's like, I don't know if I would be the quickest to be the first person to market if it's just going to open up a roadway for somebody to take what you did and do it better. Like your prototypes, I think, are super important. Your testing, you knowing what's going to blow up and what's going to explode and which mold you have to whack. I don't know. I just wanted to call that out. I thought that was I think that's a really smart thing that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'll tell you, like, probably about 2 years ago, I remember I was with one of my friends, and she was just moving over to like the West Village, and we went up to the top of the Standard for some drinks. And while up there, met this guy from London. He owns a drone company in London, and we were just chatting. And before I knew he had a drone company, and before he knew, that I was doing this, we were just talking some stuff. And then it kind of came out and he was like, oh, so, like, what do you do? And again, this was one of those days when I was, in my head and I was working on it. And I was like, oh, I do this, but I'm working on this project on the side. So he was picking a little bit at it. So I kind of told him what I'm working on, not any details, but what I'm working on. And then he just came right out. He's like, look, I own a drone company doing this in London. I would love to finance you. And he offered me 250K. And that's like, this is pre even having patent filed. I was still in the process of learning about patents. And I said, you know what? I'll get back to you when, I have it working and things a little further on. Then he offered to relocate me to London to work with his team. Mm. And I said, you know what? I'll think about that after I'm a little further along. Then he offered me a sizable amount of money just to spearhead his team. It's like he really, really, and like I said, I didn't even tell him how I'm doing anything. I kind of gave him like the gist of what I gave you. And in the end, when I said, I'll get back to you once I have things better sorted and, have a patent, he looked at me and said, I know this is going to work. And I was like, why do you say that? And he's like, most people would have jumped at the money.
Oh, that's a good. That's
yeah. True. That's great. That's great. That is great. Wow. Wow.
I think I'll end that thought too with like, do you remember this story, Mark? So, on Shark Tank, they have, they always have people on there, and the little kid that had the Moe's bows tie. Do you remember that one? Yes. He's like a little 9-year-old kid that had his grandmother hand sewing these little bow ties, and he started selling them. And all of the sharks said, I'm out. And one of them finally said, he was the FUBU guy. What's his name?
Oh, yeah. Damon John.
Thank you. Damon. Yeah. And
Damon
he
John,
told,
yeah.
he kind of said a story, Colin, that was very similar. He goes, early on somebody offered me, and I think it was 100K, to be a part of my company, but take a certain percentage of it. And he's like, do you know what that would have been for me? Like just a couple of years later, it would have been millions and millions of dollars. And I'm so grateful that I didn't do it. So what I'm going to offer you, and he told this cute little 9-year-old boy, he goes, what I'm going to offer you is no money, but what I'm going to offer you is my mentorship. And if you go look up the company today, the company's like all over the place. They're in Nordstrom. Obviously, they've turned it. The grandmother's probably not hand sewing them anymore. Yeah. There's a factory making them, and there's some kind of process.
She might have one elf.
Yeah, exactly. It went from like one elf to a whole, a whole bunch. And so Colin, a couple, wrapping up our time together, some of the things that I think Mark and I saw were, not only how interesting you are, how brilliant you are, how patient you are. Like I learned a lot of things from you just listening to you talk. And I thoroughly enjoyed, Mark, I don't know about you, but like I thoroughly enjoyed this is a very different show episode for our viewers, because usually we're riffing on an idea that somebody wants to go out and talk about. And it's kind of opposite. It's kind of like, I don't want to talk too much about this because like, I'm still working on it kind of thing. But here's the gist of it. But just from our conversation, Colin, what are some things that, obviously they're your ideas, but what are some great things that came up during the conversation that we had with you today, or during your share with us today?
I'll tell you, like this is the first time that I'm talking about it to, Mark's a friend, so we talked about it, but like to talk about it, like, I guess publicly to just general. So it's, the whole thing just made me rethink my direction and like what I'm doing. And, because like, I think when you're in the midst of designing, creating, and thinking, you're just kind of all over the place. If I turn the camera around and you saw my workbench, you'd be like, damn, it looked like everything just exploded in here. I think you're doing that. Now, if I know you're coming over, I organize it and, make things neat and make it camera ready. And I think just doing this has kind of made my mind camera ready. I've organized a lot of things, just like, if Home and Garden's coming over, I, sweep all that dirt under the rug. So get things cleaned up. So this has kind of forced me to, and it was interesting because when Mark told me, he's like, I said, well, how's this going to go down? He said, well, he's like, it's kind of like a TED talk, but not. He said,
Yeah.
just discuss it. So now I had to go back to some old notes I had here and there, and I'm looking. I was like, okay, what was my direction? What was I thinking then? What am I thinking now? Where do I see the differences? And you know, and just like how did it go from there to here? Especially I tell you, one of the big things was going from a hobby to an investment. It's like that was like a big
Yeah.
deal because when you treat something as a hobby, when you have spare time and spare resources, then you do that hobby. When you treat something as an investment, you allocate time, resources, money to it. You're like, I need X amount to get this done. And I put myself on a timeline. It's like, what do I need to buy? What do I need to do? Okay, let me make that happen. So that was like definitely one of those things that I was like, oh yeah, I remember having to go through that mental switch. So, this forced me to think about all that stuff, which up until now hadn't had any reason to.
Nice.
I love that.
Nice.
I think that's a good way to kind of end this conversation today. I never thought about something like that, Colin. You're like, I had to get my mind camera ready. I was like, I love that. And I totally understand that. And for those of you that don't know, our little behind the scenes, Colin showed us what's literally
behind the curtain
behind him. So we got to see that. And maybe some other day we'll show it to you. But
for those who don't know, like I
yeah.
threw all this together in 20 minutes. I came down here. I was like, oh no, I can't let them see that. I had to grab a sound blanket, some clips. I had to get the light. I showed them the whole behind. It's like, it's a wreck over here.
I don't know if it's a wreck just as much of like it's the lab. It's really the lab. And so
I know I'm down in the lair. Like
yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know, Colin. I would love to ask for our viewers, like if people can kind of follow and track you, like where's the best place for them to kind of see what you're doing?
It's funny. I guess at the moment, because I haven't even established setting all that stuff up because to be honest, I don't even care. Like, how you'll always have that person that will hand you a business card, but they don't even have a business. I never really cared so much about like gaining any traction or all of that. And my mind is still on making this work. I mean, I definitely should be in that space because I am going to be coming around like, can I get a dime? Can you help them? I definitely do need to start thinking about that. But at the moment, I guess if anyone really was just interested and wanted to reach out, Instagram, they could just reach me on Instagram or, I mean, through the show, Marc has my info. If anyone either way, I'm not hard to find unless I owe you money.
And then you're extremely hard to find. Then you disappeared into the night.
I am into the wind.
Into the wind. Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, Marc and I really appreciate having you on the show, Colin. This has been so fascinating. You are such an interesting person. I am now forever going to call you Mr. Fountain of Interesting for sure. And to everybody watching, anybody watching, I just want to say this one thing. I think in some weird way, no, not weird, some fabulous, awesome way, you've watched a historical moment go down. You've heard Colin talk about something that we don't know anything about yet. Ooh, it just gives me a little bit of the chills for that. So
you want to know something funny? That gives me a chill, but in a different way, because I usually never, again, when I tell people things, it's when it's done. I never let people see all the things that didn't work, because then you move me like, damn, he's a failure. If I only show you the things that worked, you're like, bloody genius. So this is the first time where I'm like, all right, this is what I'm working on. If it fails, people are like, this guy. But I don't wake up planning on failure. I just plan on problems and hurdles and getting over them.
Mm.
As I told Mark, I try to fail fast. That way I can recover quick.
And I was just going to say, I literally wrote down what you said earlier, fail faster and fix it quick. I wrote that down.
You know what? I'll
so
give
good.
one little thing, which was a huge thing for me. Now, Mark and I, again, we've touched this many times. We went to tech, and like our passing grade was 85, and they gear you so much on excellence and education and doing well. And like my family, Jamaican Chinese background, I was born in Jamaica. And when you come from like a Caribbean background, failing is not a word used. You succeed, you succeed. You know, it's kind of like Yoda. There is no fail, there's only do. You know, it's very, very ingrained in you. So and I'll tell you, this was a problem for me. So for the bulk of my life, I was always afraid to fail. And that failure, that fear of failure, kept me from trying a lot of things, because I'd be at the crossroads and I'd be doing the math in my head how to not fail. I was trying to be the sharpshooter, getting the perfect shot every time. And I did so many calculations of, the distance, the wind, the arc of the bullet, rotation of the earth. I'm doing so many of that I never took the shot. And that motivational speaker, Wayne Dyer, one time I was listening to him, and I'll tell you, this blew my mind, changed my entire way of thinking. He said that he always encouraged his kids. He has a son and a daughter, if I remember correctly. He encouraged them to fail every day. And at dinner, he would ask them, what did you fail at? So they would tell him what they failed at. And he'd say, okay, what did you learn from that? They'd tell him what they learned. And he'd say, okay, now what are you going to do different next time? And suddenly I was like, wow, I embraced failure. Failure didn't mean that I failed. It just means I didn't find the right path yet. And the faster I fail, the quicker I could recoup. Yeah. And I tell you, like, that was a huge difference for me, because I spent so much time trying not to fail, and like so many like opportunities and just things. It took me so long to do things. Now I was like, all right, let me get out here and fail quick so I can fix it and move on to the next thing. Because like I said, I'm playing whack-a-mole with these problems. So now I like wake up and I try to fail. I try to blow it up.
So the whole line for this entire show is kind of like the fail quicker and fix it, fail faster and fix it quick.
Yeah.
Wow. Awesome.
I love that. Colin, thank you so much. Thank you for to be on our show and to be willing to be talking about this and kind of pulling the curtains back a little bit on what you're doing. I don't think no matter what happens on the other side of this, anybody's going to say you're anything but a genius because of the whole process that you took us through today. Freaking brilliant.
Thank you so much, man. It's been so wonderful to be here. This was great. And now Mark and I finally got to finish our conversation we started at Juniors over Cheesecake.
I know. I was gonna make this thing at the beginning. I was like, I've only been to Juniors once, but I know it's like a really cool Brooklyn establishment. So it kind of puts the icing on the cheesecake, if you will, for us.
And granted, Juniors is just a stone throw from our high school, so it was one of those places to hang out all the time.
True. Brooklyn Tech.
Yeah.
Brooklyn Tech. So we got 2 Brooklyn Techers in the house. And for everybody watching, thank you for watching. And if any of you out there know of somebody brilliant in your life, like Colin, that's maybe doing something cool that you'd want us to chat with them, hit us up. On it's about to go show.com, Marc and Cathey, got to get the C, got to get the E. And Colin, thank you for being on today. It really went down today. It'll go down next time. And thank you all for watching.
I'll definitely come back when things are like in the next phase.
We're going to get a part 2 on that.
I will. Yeah. Once that's in the next phase, I'll bring you along for the ride. Cause now we're fam, like I'm here. Nice. So since we got this,
everybody,
hey, we might as well chronicle the whole thing. So,
you heard it here. It went down here on It's About to Go Down.
It's now down. It's down already.